Hello and welcome back to another video here with me, Meoni, for Final Fantasy XIV, and a great deal of people are no doubt releasing their exclusive media tour information today, all recorded firsthand as they were invited out to either the North American media tour or the European one that took place in London. I have to preface this by saying I was not invited directly, presumably due to restrictions on the European media tour favouring traditional media and not that of European Twitch and YouTube creators, whereas the North American one, for whatever reason, did have YouTube and streamers in attendance alongside some of their traditional media, so it is what it is. So today it falls to me to use whatever I can find to talk about the event itself and what you can expect in 5.0. Fortunately, traditional media covers events like this in such a way that this isn't too great of a problem, as well as I acknowledge that I take no credit for this. So firstly, let's look at a main press interview that took place at the media tour courtesy of CGMagonline, whom posted this article, which I'll be using for this video, and there'll be a link to their article in the description. Go and support them if you want to. Apparently, along with the private interviews that a lot of creators got, they had this press one. They're a lot more generalized, where everyone was sat in a room simply asking questions. The first question featured here is, I'm always looking for ways to stay connected to the world of Final Fantasy XIV, even when I'm away from home. Are there plans to further update the official companion app with more functions, such as dispatching retainer ventures, creating glamour plates, chatting in the free company channel, and so on? The producer and director of 14, Naoki Yoshida, replies, the implementation of Shadowbringers involves a lot of system updates, so the companion app will have to accommodate those updates first and foremost. However, we do want to make it so that you can dispatch retainers on ventures from the app, and we'll be working on that once the system updates are in place. Following that, we want to look into creating functionalities that you can only access from the app side. Players will have unique ways to interface with Final Fantasy XIV independently of the game client itself." End quote. So the idea of retainer ventures, at least from your phone, is actually a thing we might see, which personally to me would make the app already 10 times more useful. I mean, you're essentially making Gil on the move at that point with quick ventures. It's good that they've still got the companion app in mind, because a lot of other games that had companion apps just never utilized them properly. Anyway, the next question asks, will Shadowbringers eventually add more large-scale gold saucer content, such as the long-rumoured Blitzball? On a related note, will you perhaps lift the restrictions on triple triad deck creation, since 4-star cards are currently unusable alongside 5-star cards? Yoshi replies, we don't have anything ready for the release of Shadowbringers. The reason for this is because whenever we launch a new expansion, the players focus on the main scenario, as well as leveling their jobs and participating in PvE battle content. As a result, we have a general rule to not make updates to the Gold Saucer and PvP in X.0 patches. We do, however, have updates planned for patch 5.1, and regarding Triple Triad, we are currently drafting plans for how we want to revise the rules for deck composition, so we will hopefully have something to show you in a future update. End quote. Personally, I would like to see a separate discipline when it comes to Triple Triad, sort of like keep the current rule sets and then have certain unlocked rule sets where anything goes. It would be fun to have those restrictions more open, but I'd hope that it would be in some way separated from the current game, or like something like we had in Final Fantasy VIII where rules actually spread to various regions on a timer or something. That would be an interesting evolution of that minigame, but we'll have to wait and see. So the next question is all about music, and the press directly ask, if Stormblood's musical motif could largely be described as Asian, how would you describe the overall music feel for Shadowbringers? On that note, will you consider releasing the existing Blu-ray soundtracks as well as future soundtracks via digital storefronts like iTunes and Amazon? Many players are only interested in the music itself and not the accompanying visuals. Yoshida responds with, I requested that Shadowbringers' bass theme to have a rock flavour. Hearing the music in our trailers, it sounds fairly atypical of Final Fantasy music, which is what I wanted. In terms of songs outside the opening theme, our approach to composition is close to what we did with A Realm Reborn. Heavensward leaned on pipe organs and a cathedral sound with a religious tone, while Stormblood, as you mentioned, had an Asian influence. I wanted Stormblood to have a comparatively well dry sound. In Shadowbringers, players will be visiting unexplored areas for the first time, so we wanted each area to have a specific theme. The goal here is to have players experience each region with its own motif, and featured instruments to give that feeling of stepping into lands untravelled. To your second question, the group that handles the publishing of our musical media is a different department from ours, so the decision of how to release it does not fall upon my shoulders. There does seem to be a trend in that division that leans towards disc-based media. There is a hesitation to rely upon third-party distributors like Amazon due to the cut of revenue that they take by acting as distributors. For about a year now, musical director Masayoshi Soken and I have wanted to break that mold. We don't want to have to depend on a disc-based medium because a lot of people don't have Blu-ray players these days, and it adds another layer of hassle getting the music on your preferred device. We feel it's important to have digital media available. With that being said, there are currently some tracks available on digital storefronts, and we're hoping we can offer more in the future, end quote. So next up, back to actual gameplay questions that you might be more interested in. Regarding the trust system, I was surprised to see a system that encourages solo play to such a degree in an MMORPG. What was the thought process behind implementing this system? The answer is, there are two reasons. The first is while Final Fantasy XIV is an MMORPG, there are a huge variety of people who play it. Some enjoy battles and raids, others spend hours posing their characters for the perfect screenshot, some just enjoy sitting around chatting with their friends. Because Final Fantasy XIV is a story-driven game, there may be some players who want to immerse themselves further and take their time working through content, but that becomes difficult when you're working on other people's schedules. I want to break the preconceived notion that you have to party up to experience the story simply because this is an MMORPG. Even if every single player utilized the trust system, hypothetically speaking, that still wouldn't be detrimental to Final Fantasy XIV because players are still sharing an online environment and participating in the social aspects that come with it regardless. The second reason for the trust system is because we want players to fall in love with major NPCs even more deeply. You journey alongside these people throughout the story, but whenever there is a dungeon to explore, they've suddenly got to go and run an errand, he laughs. That's why we designed their AI to reflect each of their personalities. It really impacts this sense of, I'm trying to save the world with my close allies at my back, end quote. So I guess it's more about character development and association with them than simply just a gameplay mechanic, and hopefully that means we can get some form of relationship building, since the Scions will actually be with us in those fights. I'd love to get closer to some of the NPCs in the game, and hopefully this might be that opportunity. Next up, the press in attendance in the hall ask, regarding the Yorha Dark Apocalypse raid penned by Nier Automata creator Yoko Taro, what is the process you employ in bringing in guest creators to make content for 14? Yoshida responds, once again we have two major reasons. The first is easy to understand. It's a good promotion from a marketing standpoint. By having a notable creator involved, it allows us to reach those players who have not been familiar with Final Fantasy XIV, but who are fans of a guest creator's works. The other reason is because it bestows upon us valuable outside perspective. We've been working on this one game for a very long time, and as such we've learned how to optimize development and create new content efficiently. As a result, we may sometimes start to lean towards a specific rule in our creation, and it's difficult to break that mold. When a guest creator comes in, they may not have experience with the mold we've been working with, and they will come up with ideas that will break it. Sometimes they address things that we've purposefully avoided doing in 14, but that makes us work harder to bring their ideas to life. We think this approach leads to a better experience for everyone because it forces us to take on challenges that otherwise we would have not considered, thereby surprising our players in return. In terms of how we construct the pipeline to create content with a guest, it differs depending on who we work with. With the Return to Ivalice raid designer Yasumi Matsuno, he's actually an experienced player who knows the rules of Final Fantasy XIV, and he's very story-oriented in how he approaches things. For Yoko Taro, he's not familiar with our game before he played it, so he came in asking what sort of things are possible. I replied, I can't establish those rules for you because they will become a limitation. With that dialogue and the mutual understanding, Taro-san would relay what kind of impact he wanted to make with his content, and then the team would work with him to accommodate. That sort of back and forth is essential, I think. Next, a question was asked about MMORPGs as a whole. Today, the language of MMORPGs is starting to be taken out of that space and molded into different experiences. We see it as a base for games like Destiny, for example. When creating new Final Fantasy XIV content, is the team reacting or responding to shifts in games as a whole? Yoshi replies, frankly, no. We even have a policy behind that line of thinking. If we wanted to take inspiration from another game's mechanics, we would have to adjust the overall framework of 14. That includes the gameplay experience and the play cycle, like how long we want players doing a specific piece of content, etc., rather than taking the time and effort to make those sorts of adjustments. We might as well create a new game separate from 14 entirely. We also don't want to alienate our existing players by drastically changing the framework of 14. Although I love other games and the creativity they're showing, for us to make such a large change we'd run the risk of breaking 14. End quote. So at least that means they're decided on their path. Sometimes you might actually see an MMO try too hard to clone every latest edition that comes out in the market, and I don't think for the most part that 14 tries to compete in that way. In many ways, a lot of the things I've seen personally the past couple of years has been a sort of direct evolution on most of that technology, especially stuff like phasing that we see from World of Warcraft. It's interesting then that they focus on keeping the core concept at heart, and that's something to admire, I think. The last two questions from this article then. The first asks, when adding a new job, what is the creative perspective versus the game balance perspective, especially for jobs that are new to Final Fantasy XIV? Yoshi responds, I would argue that 14's jobs are not repeats of those from previous Final Fantasies. While they do have names that are carried over, we try to make it so that the play experience and controls are completely unique to 14. As such, we haven't identified these jobs as needing to line up with those in previous Final Fantasies. There are three major factors we consider when adding new jobs. 1, the marketing and PR angle. 2, when we look at the stats of how many players are playing which jobs and we have access to that information, the numbers skew towards DPS roles. So if we are going to add multiple new jobs, we lean towards DPS roles because of their popularity. Player feedback is of course important, and we even have a ranked list of which jobs are in the most demand. We keep it in mind, of course. Third, we have to consider which role to add in every expansion to keep the player population most balanced. It's a matter of thinking from an operations perspective. End quote. I mean, a lot of that was fairly obvious. It's interesting to see that they have a sort of most wanted list though, so I wonder what might be at the top of it currently, other than obviously a healer that people were most vocal about before the reveal of Dancer being a DPS role. It does show that they do listen to public feedback, so this probably means a healer is near guaranteed for the next expansion, I would say, after this, and I'd be amazed if they didn't. And the last question of this interview. Any updates planned for the Eggie Glamour system? I know, a short answer is fine. Yoshi simply replies, yes, we are still working on it. Look for an update around patch 5.1 at the earliest, end quote. So there you go, Eggie Glamours aren't completely lost as a feature. They do seem to have their mind focused on listening to the wants of the community in general. Whether they actually perform on this is anyone's guess at this point. I thought this press interview was a little weak in comparison to some that we've seen before. Perhaps the questions could have been a lot more direct to actual gameplay features and questions about things that are coming in Shadowbringers, but I suppose it is what it is, and you'll probably see more of those direct questions from people individually reporting through content creation later this week. Either way, like I say, a link to this article will be in the description. I take absolutely no credit in this media event, this interview, or any of the source material used. Thank you all kindly for watching, and I'll see you all next time.